In the annals of human history, there are moments when nature itself breaks its own laws, and death comes out of nowhere. On August 21, 1986, in the silence of the African night, a tragedy occurred in the mountains of Cameroon that will not be recounted in school textbooks. At 9 p.m., there was a deafening roar, and within minutes the settlements were enveloped in a thick, dead silence. Within a radius of 25 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy, there was not a soul left. People, livestock, all without exception. They died instantly, without a single cry, without a struggle. More than 1,700 people fell victim to a mysterious death, and no one could explain the cause of this disaster. Neither the plague nor a military attack could provide an answer. It was a mystery that even science could not solve. The first investigators found only lifeless bodies covered with strange red sores and a single survivor who had only vague memories of a faint smell reminiscent of gunpowder and a sudden loss of consciousness. The answer lay deep underground, just a few kilometers from the death zone. In this place, which local peoples had avoided since ancient times, there was a frightening reservoir, a lake on a volcano. They believed that evil spirits that brought death lived in its waters, and their fears were justified. When the mystery was solved, it turned out that the culprit was not evil spirits, but something much more terrible, hidden in the bowels of the earth. Instead of warning the world about the terrible potential that had been discovered, the government chose to hide the truth, releasing only fragmentary information and downplaying the scale of the threat. They didn't mention that Nyos hadn't used all of its dark power and that dozens of similar killer lakes were hiding in wait, threatening millions of lives. This place had always been alive, and the people whose ancestors had rested on this land for centuries felt it deep in their hearts. They did not know this from stories or legends, but from an inner, reverent feeling that was not to be shared and that had been an integral part of their existence since birth. For them, the lake was never just water collected in a stone bowl. It was an unblinking eye, a black mirror whose motionless surface did not look at the vain sky, but gazed into the quietest abyss, reflecting not clouds, but only what was hidden below, in the depths of the earth. This was the abode of the spirits, the ancients, whose essence was as eternal as the rocks themselves that held this dark water, the guardians. Their will was inextricably linked to this place. Good and evil in the human sense could not characterize them. They were a primal, dormant force, and they had a covenant. This agreement was simpler and deeper than any breath. It consisted of one thing: absolute peace. The guardian spirits demanded silence, which expressed respect for them. Their law was simple: do not disturb the water, do not disturb the depths, do not awaken the centuries-old sleep of the earth that protects the abode. Live nearby, feed on the gifts of the earth, but never try to touch the abode itself. For centuries, this unwritten agreement was strictly observed. People felt fear, but it was a wise, instinctive fear, similar to that which arises before a sleeping predator. This fear was the basis of their wisdom. They drank water from the clear streams that flowed rapidly into the Black Mirror, but never took it directly from the lake itself. They did not fish because its depths were considered a void that did not belong to the world of the living, and they did not wash their clothes in it. As soon as the sun began to set, they instinctively moved away from it. The elders tirelessly repeated to the young, "Do not stare into the Black Mirror for too long, or the spirits will see you and remember you." Life went on in its measured, predictable course. Generations followed one after another. Fear, which was once knowledge, became a habit. Habit became tradition, and tradition became an unbreakable law. And as long as this law was obeyed, the spirits remained silent. They remained in their impenetrable darkness, and their sleep, like an invisible thread, maintained a fragile balance. The earth bore fruit and streams quenched thirst. Life was undoubtedly not without difficulties, but it continued. Time passed, and the world around them, even in this remote wilderness, was changing. The elders who had kept the covenant were passing away, taking with them the living memory of the primal fear. The new generation they had brought into the world was growing up differently. Their lives were as poor as their fathers had been. They saw how difficult their fate was and how little they received in return for their labor. News reached them from the city about the wider world, where science and new laws explained everything, leaving no room for the supernatural. These new people were just like everyone else, made of flesh and blood, speaking the same language, eating the same food. But their hearts no longer heard the quiet whispers of the earth. They looked at the abode of spirits with new, pragmatic eyes. Instead of the black mirror, they saw just a big hole filled with water, useless for anything. You couldn't fish in it. Instead of sacred ground, they saw only a fertile patch at the very edge, which remained untilled while their families needed fields to grow corn. The wisdom of generations, which had previously inspired fear, became ignorance and old superstitions in the eyes of the young. They overcame their fear. They were tired of poverty. They wanted to live what they thought was a more dignified and proper life. "The elders talk about spirits," whispered the bravest among them. "But we only see hungry children. Why, if these spirits are so powerful, do they not help us? Why have they deprived us of fish and land by the water?" They stopped paying attention to the warnings. The wisdom accumulated over centuries seemed tedious to them, and they rejected it. Their time had come, they decided. Their new life began. They did not come as invaders, taking by force what was not theirs. They decided to take advantage of what they believed was rightfully theirs by birth. The process of desecration began, slowly but surely. First, they dared to plow the land right by the shore, where the elders had forbidden them to even go near. The land yielded, and the first harvest exceeded all expectations. The spirits were silent, as if approving. New things were brought to the village from the city: bright plastic canisters, bags of chemicals for the fields, cheap batteries for flashlights. But these things quickly broke and were thrown away. The trash grew, and they could find no better place to dump it than the useless abode. And emboldened by impunity, they committed their last fatal sacrilege. No one person made this decision. It was a silent, mutual agreement. They came to the conclusion that the Black Mirror was the perfect place to get rid of everything superfluous, everything that their new existence had brought them. Torn plastic bags, rusty cans, toxic fertilizer waste, and dead batteries. All of this was sent into the clean streams that fed the abode. In the end, it all ended up in the Black Mirror itself, settling at the bottom. This was not just littering. It was an act of contempt thrown into the unblinking eye of the spirits. It was a blow that pierced the very heart of the sleeping force. It was complete betrayal. At that very moment, when the world had existed peacefully for hundreds of years, the treaty was broken. The water in the lake stirred, not from the wind, as usual, but from something deeper. It shuddered like a living creature from unbearable, piercing pain. Its entire immense depth rippled. At first, a complete unnatural silence fell upon the earth. The night birds fell silent. The wind stopped blowing. It seemed as if the whole world had frozen, listening with bated breath. And suddenly, from the very heart of the lake, came the roar of the abyss. It was not a sound that could be distinguished by the ears. It was a powerful vibration coming from beneath the earth. It did not reach the ears, but penetrated deeper, into the chest, into the bones, into the teeth. The ground beneath their feet trembled, but not with the jolt characteristic of an earthquake. It trembled and hummed, low, ugly, like the growl of a huge beast awakened from sleep. A roar came from the very heart of the Black Mirror. It came from the depths where sunlight never reached. It was not an explosion, not a rumble. It was an exhalation, a heavy, powerful exhalation of pent-up rage. It was a sign of revenge. The young people who had brought the trash froze in place. They did not understand what had happened. Fear gripped them, but it was still animalistic, instinctive, unconscious. But the old people who lived far from the lake in their homes fell to their knees. They understood everything. The agreement had been broken, the peace had been destroyed, and the guardian spirits of the waters had awakened to begin their silent but all-encompassing judgment. This roar served only as a warning, an ominous harbinger of war, but the punishment itself had not yet come. It waited patiently for its moment until the rumbling subsided, and then an all-consuming, lifeless silence was to descend upon the earth. When the roar of the abyss subsided, the all-consuming silence that the elders had warned of descended. It was a silence that foreshadowed complete catastrophe, and from a crack in the black mirror, from the very source of the spirits, rose the embodied retribution. The inhabitants of the surrounding area called this substance the breath of the abyss. It was invisible and possessed extraordinary heaviness. Insensitive to the wind, it did not rise into the air. The breath of the abyss flowed across the land like a very dense, cold stream, completely obeying the will of the guardians. The silent cloud, driven by some purpose, filled the lowlands, valleys and stream beds to ensure the complete cleansing of the cursed zone. Although the cloud was invisible to the human eye, its density was palpable. It appeared with only one purpose, to consume life itself. It was judgment, and the spirits did not allow their verdict to be accompanied by panic or screams. The punishment had to be silent and all-encompassing. For this reason, before consuming the living, embodied fury affected their consciousness, inducing a feeling of sweet, irresistible sleep. Those who slept in their homes did not wake up. Those who were awake experienced instant, uncontrollable fatigue that shut down their minds. They fell without strength, without feeling suffocation, realizing the danger, or calling for help. They were overcome by this deceptive sweetness, this sleep from which there was no awakening. Fathers and children froze in the embrace of sweet sleep. Women remained by the hot coals of the hearth. Their faces showed no signs of struggle, only the mark of sudden peace that enveloped them in deadly silence. The first rays of the sun that illuminated the cursed zone shed light on a depressing picture, complete, unbearable immobility. Within a radius of many kilometers, all life had ceased to exist. More than 1,700 people, livestock, birds, insects, everything without exception, had died. All that remained were bodies frozen in the moment of their last breath. The bodies of the dead bore the seal of the spirits, an unmistakable sign confirming that this was retribution, not a random event. Even several hours later, the air was filled with the persistent, dry, metallic smell of gunpowder. And on the skin of people who had been in close proximity to the silent cloud, red sores appeared, like brands. These sores served as evidence of an unearthly punishment, which was meant to declare to the whole world that what had happened was not a man-made disaster, but the result of the Guardian's judgment. When news of the tragedy leaked outside the isolated world, shock gave way to panic and hasty action. More than 1,700 dead, scattered throughout the valleys, posed a real threat of epidemic and social destabilization. The authorities, who had already begun to construct a false version of events, made one demand: the immediate and complete destruction of all traces. Rescuers and volunteers from all over the world poured into the cursed zone. They worked in chaotic conditions with only minimal equipment and did not have the time or opportunity to conduct medical examinations. Anyone who showed no signs of life, who was lifelessly cold and pale, was declared dead without question. In this panic, caused by fear and urgent necessity, a tragic and inhumane decision was made. The bodies were loaded onto trucks and dumped into huge mass graves dug in haste. There was no time for ceremonies or farewells, only the order to clear the land as quickly as possible. It was this chaos, this criminal rush, that gave Ngozi her chance. A sharp, rough jolt pulled her out of her sweet, enveloping oblivion. Her first sensation was the absolute coldness of the bodies around her and the strong pressure from above. She was lying on a pile of corpses. Her body instinctively tensed. The sharp smell of gunpowder, which now smelled like death to her, filled her nostrils, and her throat tightened in a dry spasm. Her eyes opened in complete darkness. The abyss's breathing had stopped, but the darkness was so thick that she couldn't immediately understand where she was. Only the faint light coming in from the side made her realize that she was moving. She could feel solid, damp ground beneath her. And only when she fully understood the situation did a chilling horror grip her mind. She was being carried to her grave. She was alive. Opening her eyes, she saw mountains of bodies around her. Her body did not obey her, but her instinct for self-preservation overcame the sleep of the spirits. She could only wheeze softly, a sound barely audible against the hum of the engine, which attracted the attention of one of the truck drivers. He turned his head for a moment and saw the red sores on her skin, her wide-open eyes, and he was overcome with a horror that no one who had ever seen a dead person would experience. Ngozi was saved, but her life became a curse. She was alive, but she found herself in a world that no longer existed for her. She came to in a tent camp, but it could not be called salvation. Her husband and 4 children, whom she had searched for frantically, did not return. Their bodies, consumed by the embodied fury, were found together. Her family, her only support and reason for living, was lost. She was surrounded by people who had miraculously survived, but their shared grief could not fill her personal, all-consuming void. Ngozi, pulled from the truck, was no longer a symbol of a miracle, but had become the living embodiment of a universal tragedy. But her story was not the most horrific part of the aftermath. After the trial, the tragedy took the form of a second wave of deaths. Many of the survivors who remained alive were unable to cope with the loneliness and grief that befell them. Men who had lost all their children and women who had lost their husbands chose to join their loved ones. They took their own lives, preferring to return to the sweet dream from which, in their opinion, fate had mistakenly torn them away. The most frightening question hanging over the cursed zone was the question of chaos and haste. How many people had already been buried under the cold earth? How many of them, feeling the cold and the pressure of other bodies, understood the terrifying truth at the very last moment of their lives? This question became an eternal stigma on humanity's attempt to cover up the traces of the spirit judgment with inhuman speed. The will of the Guardians has not disappeared from the abode. It remains here as a powerful, indomitable force, rooted in the very depths of the heart of the sleeping force. The spirits have not ceased their vengeance. They have only paused it in order to accumulate new, even more destructive fury. The deep fire serves as the main instrument of the spirits, providing continuous cyclical recharging of the lake. The sleeping force, which is the eternal and infinite source of incarnate fury, does not cease its work. Even after the quiet cloud was released and scattered across the valleys, the deep fire continues to operate with the same intensity. It gradually but steadily pushes the new embodied retribution deeper into the water, increasing the concentration of this deadly substance. In the perception of the spirits, the Black Mirror served as a conscious and obedient instrument of their will. The water of Nyos, outwardly dark and serene, was not merely a repository for gas. It was transforming into an increasingly concentrated will for vengeance. The judgment thus was doomed to cyclical and inexorable repetition. The lake immediately began to accumulate a thick substance in its cold, deep layers. With each passing day, the threat grew, making the repetition of the judgment not only possible, but inevitable. Its onset could be sudden, at any moment, when the balance of incarnate retribution reached a critical mass. The forces that arrived from outside, entering the cursed zone, discovered thousands of corpses and heard stories about the smell of gunpowder and red sores. But their logical, scientific minds did not allow them to believe in the existence of spirits, the agreement, or the living will of the lake. They needed to find a simple, material explanation that could be measured, recorded, and most importantly, declared defeated. They immediately concocted their lie. The authorities claimed that it was a single, inconsequential emission. They called it a geological anomaly, a natural phenomenon beyond human control. They stubbornly repeated that the incident was exceptional and would not happen again. Such misinformation was necessary to prevent panic and maintain control over the region. The worst moment for the authorities came when measurements revealed the terrifying truth: the deep fire had not been extinguished. All their scientific methods, technology, and power proved useless against the indomitable force, which could not be measured or stopped. Admitting their powerlessness, admitting to the world that the judgment of spirits had only begun, not ended, would mean the complete destruction of their system and unpredictable panic. Their only strategy was to completely conceal the information, to hide the fact of a constant deadly threat so as not to sign their own death warrant. The authorities imposed an official version on the world that was not to be questioned: a single geological cataclysm, an emission that had exhausted its power. They promised complete control and technical stabilization of the lake in order to close the issue of the Court of Spirits. But for those who survived, who saw the red sores on their bodies and smelled the gunpowder, the concept of an exhausted incident was alien. Their experience, hardened in the flames of personal tragedy, spoke otherwise. The spirits had not disappeared. The black will of the lake had not quenched its thirst. It had retreated to reflect in silence and establish new, more cruel rules. Lake Nyos had transformed from an ordinary abode into an all-seeing eye, tirelessly watching over the cursed zone. The spirits, hiding in the depths, watched everything closely, demanding compliance with their main, unwritten law: absolute peace. No violations, no interference with the land and water, but the spirits, remembering the betrayal, did not rely on human memory. They held over the people a threat more terrible than the sudden silent cloud. The will of the Guardians not only used the deep fire to constantly recharge the water, but also exploited the vulnerability of the very barrier that protected their abode. The authorities desperately tried to hide the fact of the real danger. The stone dam that had held back the Black Mirror for centuries was in critical condition. Its possible breach threatened a catastrophic release of a huge volume of water into the valleys. This turned into a double punishment. In case of violation of the law of peace, the spirits would not only unleash incarnate retribution from the depths, but also bring down the abode in its original form, stones, water, and everything it holds, upon the world. The breach of the dam became physical, indisputable proof of their law, a weapon that deprives everyone of any chance of salvation. They survived through official demagoguery. They did not believe in empty words about stability and degassing. In their attempts to control the lake, they saw only naive, futile madness that only inflamed the wrath of the Guardians. Their only response to the danger was to flee. No one dared to return. It was impossible to walk past the fields to see the silhouettes of their dead neighbors. It was also impossible to breathe the cursed air. They left this land forever, taking with them not only grief, but also a palpable fear that penetrated to the very bones. Lake Nyos has forever remained a place excluded from the world of the living. It is a territory where mystical reality has triumphed over the human mind. The spirits did not forgive and established their own law, which is guarded by the indomitable force lurking in its depths. They live in constant, icy fear, knowing that the spirits are watching. And if the peace is disturbed, the punishment will be terrible and inevitable, for the spirits are waiting. And only their complete, icy silence separates the world of the living from the all-consuming silence that once came from the void.